On this episode of Delivering Marketing Joy, we talk with one of my marketing heroes. Seth Godin joins us and tells us about his new book, This is Marketing. Hey there, and welcome to another edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. I am your host, Kirby Hasseman, and I am excited today. Joining me today is Seth Godin. He's a ruckus maker, an author of 17 books, a creator of Alt MBA, and one of my marketing heroes. And second time on the program. Seth, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, you keep showing up, and this work is hard, and you are doing it, and it matters. So it's a privilege to be here. Thanks, man.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to ask a few questions here to get us going. One of the things I have been listening to is your new podcast, Akimbo. And obviously you've been a leader in the blogging world. So I'm just curious, why a podcast and why now?
Well, the first podcast was 7 years ago. That was sort of being a leader. And I recorded the whole thing in 3 days.
Wow.
And I did it as an aside. It's about entrepreneurship, and it was for a conference. And then I knew what kind of podcast I wanted to make, but I didn't do it. And the reason I didn't do it is I felt like adding that relationship with the listener opened a whole new front for me, that when someone's in your earbuds, it changes things. And so I wrote out the spec. I knew exactly what I wanted it to sound like, and I just let it sit there. And year after year, I saw podcasting exploding, and I said, yeah, well, and I was just lazy. And basically what happened was I realized if I didn't do it now, I would never do it, and I should stop complaining about it. So I took a leap, and I'm well aware that I am not at the cutting edge of the industry, but I'm not trying to get big. I'm not trying to be popular. I just had something to say, and a podcast is a great way to do it.
I actually love it. It's, again, you know this, but I read your blog on a super regular basis, but I'm actually really enjoying just sort of the different take and a different way to consume it. So
thank you.
So for what it's worth, I'm really liking it. So, I talk a lot on kind of my different content about people like you and like Gary Vee and Casey Neistat, about how they inspire me to do more and better work. What are some of the things or people that kind of inspire you and get you going?
Oh, there's no doubt it's people like you. Here's the big shift. When I was coming up, there were 3 business magazines, right? There was Forbes when it was good. There was Business Week and the other one, I don't know. And there was Tom Peters and maybe a couple other people. And there was this little choke point. And we had to look through a very little peephole to see people who were doing work that mattered, who were leading, who were being generous. And now it's wide open. I mean, we're talking about 1 million books being published a year, maybe 2 million.
Wow.
We're talking about 200,000 podcasts, maybe 500,000. Yeah. So it's a mistake to think that the grassroots is something that powerful people do something to. It's the other way around. The grassroots creates our culture. And if you add up enough people who are inspiring 1,000 people each or 10,000 people each, that's a lot of people. And so when I look at the small business person who's building something, or I look at the podcaster who shows up week after week, I think those people, that's who I work for, and I am inspired to do better because of them.
That's awesome. You recently in a podcast talked about creating a hit. And I actually found that really encouraging, that a lottery ticket is like not the only way to succeed. So can you explain sort of your concept of the long tail and how that is a good way to create?
Well, the long tail is not my concept, so I'll tell you Chris's concept, and then I'll explain my take on it.
Yeah.
When the bookstore is sort of small, when Blockbuster is sort of small, when the toy store is sort of small, they only have room to stock the hits. That there's only room for 3 kinds of stuffed animals. So if you're not one of the 3 stuffed animals, you're in big trouble. And when we went online, we got rid of that problem. So now we can stock everything. And it turns out when you give people a choice, they take a choice. So I look at the numbers from Netflix. Half the movies that were watched on Netflix that were watched when Blockbuster still existed, half were movies that Blockbuster never carried. Then when Amazon versus Barnes & Noble, half the books, the titles, half the books that Amazon sold by units were titles that Barnes & Noble never carried. So what we see is that other half of the market, the long tail, is just as big as the short head.
Yeah.
Now, Chris argued that means that there's going to be this revolution in stuff that gets made, and he was correct. But critics pointed out, but if you're way down on the long tail, and you're the Jamaican artist who's selling one record a year, yeah, it all adds up, but doesn't help you because you only sold one record. And so my take on it is not that you should be Amazon's toy and make one Kindle title that they're going to sell 12 copies of. They like that. You don't like that. Instead, what I'm arguing is, and this is at the core of the new book, the smallest viable audience is what we need to look at. Not the largest possible one. The smallest viable one that we can live with. If you obsess, if I said you were only allowed to have 500 paying clients, that's all you're allowed to have, and you could pick who they were, you wouldn't pick the whiny ones. You wouldn't pick the cheap ones. You wouldn't pick the ones who are there with their arms folded saying, prove it. You'd pick the ones who want to go where you're going. So if we start with them, if we start with the people who are enrolled in the journey, then we will make better work. And we will make better work, it will be more profitable work. But not only that, the people we make it for will tell other people. So if we ignore the short head, we are more likely to get to the short head.
Wow. So I think it's interesting because it's been a little while since your last book. And I think I've heard you say, you don't just try to write books. So
yeah.
How do you know when it's time to write a new book?
Well, I think it's fair to say that I'm a hypocrite. I think you were being very kind there. I have said more than once, I am done with books. I have said more than once, I am done with traditional publishing. I am a hypocrite. I am owning that. For me, I don't think I've ever made money writing books. That's not why I do it. I try to make a difference writing books, and writing books is painful. Sitting right here in front of me is the thing I got to go through, editing everything. And you can't fix it once it's in the world, and blah, blah, blah. So I only write a book when it won't let me go. When this idea shows up, and everybody I meet, I'm like, well, yeah, but in my book, and there is no book. I'm just talking like there is one, because there's a body of work that I need to share all at once. There, read that. It's not a post thing. It's this moment. So we started the marketing seminar a year and a half ago. 6,500 people have taken it so far. And it's this intensive 100-day video conversation that we have. And I taught a lot of people a different way of thinking. And I realized I didn't have a document to go with that. There are other people who don't want to spend the time, who maybe will read a book. So I felt like I would be letting those people down if I didn't offer them my digest of what I want to teach about what marketing is now.
So I'm curious, has your philosophies on marketing changed over the last few years, or is this just an evolution?
Well, it's been 30 years since permission, 20 years since permission marketing. 10 years before that, I was writing about marketing. And the core idea has not changed at all, but the presence of Facebook and Google has meant that the people who don't get the idea have wasted an enormous amount of time and money doing the wrong thing. And it was really hard to do the wrong thing, and now it's super easy. You hit the boost button. And the number of people who think we do marketing to people as opposed to do it for people is too big. And when we do it to people, it makes everyone unhappy. When we do it for people, things can happen. So the original stuff that's in this book is significant. It's the smallest viable audience. It's understanding status roles. It's understanding the role of tension. It's this idea of putting those pieces together to cause change to happen. And if you can't own the fact that you are making change happen, then basically you're trying to be a version of Amazon, and you're going to fail. If your motto is, you can pick anyone and we're anyone, then I'm out of here, right? But if you're the one and only for a reason, and it's because you serve my dreams and fears and needs and desires, and you are making a change that I want to have made, count me in.
Yeah, I love the concept of saying the difference between marketing to someone and marketing for someone. Can you give me an example of what the difference might look like?
Well, if we if we think about every salesperson we've ever engaged with who made us unhappy, they are marketing to us. They're in it for the commission. Yep. On the other hand, if we think about a kind, thoughtful doctor who persuades us that we need surgery to save our life, she is marketing for us. We don't believe that the surgeon is doing it because otherwise she won't have anything to do this afternoon. It's a different kind of engagement, a different kind of relationship. And so for me, the word I like to use is student instead of customer. If you treated the people you are seeking to serve as students who could learn something from you, it's a different relationship than if you treat them as prospects who you can take something from, right? Because what's a prospector do? He goes into the mountains of South Dakota and pulls out gold. We're not trying to prospect, we're trying to teach. And that transaction is a fundamentally different one. And, I know that life insurance is sold, not bought. People don't wake up in the morning saying, I need to go buy some life insurance. And the argument can be made that there are certain kind of people who need a certain kind of life insurance. But mostly, life insurance gets sold because life insurance salesmen get paid to sell it. That's not as easy as it used to be. And we see this in industry after industry where we used to have a captive audience. People aren't captive anymore because they're one click away from leaving at all times.
So I guess, you've got the new book coming out. So what's the overall, and we've touched on it. So, but I just want to kind of give a synopsis here as we wrap up. What is the overall theme of the book, and what is like a giant takeaway for someone who's going to go get it?
Well, it's called This Is Marketing, which is super audacious, and I thank my publisher for the name. And the takeaway is simple. If you want to make the world better, it helps to do work that matters for people who care. And if you don't think you're doing work that matters, I hope I can persuade you should. And if you're trying to do it for people who don't care, it's probably pretty frustrating. But if I can teach a few 100,000 people to do work that matters for people who care, to make our culture better, then it was worth writing, and I hope it will be worth reading.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to check it out myself. And because we've talked about it, that I've read pretty much all your books. So I really appreciate it. And I'm going to be encouraging people to check it out. And Seth, I always appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation.
Thanks, Kirby. Thanks for the work you do. It's good to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. We'll see you next time.